This is Radio Brockley.
Hello and welcome to Brockley News, Radio Brockley's weekly show, keeping you up to date with all you need to know about what's happening in and around the hospital. I'm Alan Joyce, and coming up tonight we'll be hearing from Paul Parrish from the Aspire charity based here in the hospital. Now, he's recently been starring in the BBC TV series Ultimate Hell Week. He made it to the final 10, and he'll be telling us all about his experience in the programme, along with other behind-the-scenes gossip. Then in half an hour's time at 7:30, your chance to win some super Radio Brockley goodies without leaving your bed on Bedside Bingo with David Grouch calling out the numbers. Good luck if you're playing along. And then at 8 o'clock tonight, it's all your choice of tunes on the Sunday Request Show with Keith Reeve. So stay tuned to London's longest running hospital radio station and officially number one in London. This is Radio Brockley. Well, some people go to very extreme measures to get an interview here on Radio Brockley. This time last year, I interviewed Paul Parrish after he completed one of the world's toughest triathlons in the Arch to Arc Challenge. Now, if you haven't heard that interview before, do listen to that interview on our YouTube channel, which you can get a link to from our main website. Well, this year, he's gone one stage further by competing in arguably TV's most physically demanding reality show ever, the BBC's Special Forces Ultimate Hell Week. If you've not seen the programme, you can watch it on YouTube by searching for Ultimate Hell Week. Well, Paul kindly came back to the studio to tell us all about it, and I started by asking him why on earth he'd want to take part.
Well, I really enjoyed the interview last year, so I thought I'd better do something, so you might ask me back again. So, and this was a real curveball. I didn't see this one coming.
So, for those people who didn't watch the series, it was called Special Forces Ultimate Hell Week, which ran weekly on BBC Two for 6 weeks and just finished very recently. So for anyone who didn't see the programme, give us a summary of what the programme was about.
OK, well, the premise of the programme was to get 29 civilians who had no military background but who rated themselves as being quite fit and had been picked by the BBC, and it was basically to see how we would respond to Special Forces training and selection processes. And the Special Forces weren't just the SAS, but they were Special Forces from all over the world. So there were a number of different countries that took part. And every exercise was part of, the true selection process.
So how did you get to hear about the programme? And did you put yourself forward for it? Or did someone say, I've got a great idea for you, why don't you get involved in this?
I had a couple of people, 2 or 3 people, thanks very much, who kept sending me the application form. And those of you who will have seen the series will realise I'm not very military at all. And at first I wasn't interested. I couldn't really visualise myself in it at all. And I still can't. But there were a couple of parts on the application, a couple of sections on the application form, which I thought, that's kind of quite interesting. There was a bit about, do you have an interesting backstory? And there was also a section on swimming. And I thought, well, hang on, if swimming's involved, maybe I'd have a bit of a chance on this. So I did send off the application, and I ended up on the programme.
There must have been an element of you that thought, having done the Ironman, which, as I say, listen to the interview from last year because it's amazing, but basically it involved you running from London to Dover, swimming the Channel, and then cycling from Calais to Paris, all in one go, pretty much. And a part of you must have thought, well, if I can do that, I can take on pretty much any challenge.
I really wish that was true. And I think it's maybe something about me, and I think it comes out in the series, and I am very honest about this, but my general view of myself is that I'm a relatively normal human being, and I have huge amounts of self-doubt, and it's, I don't see the person that does these things. I just feel like I'm Paul Parrish with all those kind of bits and pieces, and that shouldn't do this, and so I never have that kind of confidence. And I know what you mean. It should seem that it should be, that puts me in a great position. But it kind of inside never feels that way to me. So it's not such a clear-cut decision for me.
So tell us a little bit about the selection process then. Presumably before you got to the final 29, you had to do a load of trials or something for them to sort of whittle it down to the final 29.
Yes, I did. And it was it really went up to the last minute as well. So I sent off this application form and was rung back very quickly, actually, and they asked me down for a screen test. I did a screen test, didn't hear a word, and actually forgot that I'd applied for it, and then got a call to say, will I come for a selection weekend? and there was a selection weekend with 55 people, so they'd whittled it down from about 1,000 to 55.
Wow.
And that was good. And it was at the selection weekend I thought, all right, I'm really quite old here. And then they rang me quite quickly and said, yeah, we like you. We'd really like to have you on the show. And I had to go for a big psychiatric interview. And just before the psychiatric interview, the producer began to sow a seed of doubt. He kept saying, the demographic is quite young, you may not actually go through. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But they sent me a pair of boots in the post, and I had to wear those in and took all the skin off my feet and thought, actually, I'm not in a very good state here. It'd be better if I didn't go. And we were due to go on a Tuesday. On the Thursday before we were due to go, I got a phone call from the producer, and he said, look, Paul, I'm really sorry, but we've made our selection and you haven't made it. I think they wanted 30 people, and there was 35 they'd shortlisted, and I wasn't on it. And then I got a phone call on the Friday morning, the following morning, and it was like, we've had another editorial meeting, we've had a rethink, and the medical team know you. They knew me from some of my long-distance triathlons, and they think you might be good value. And so, yeah, right at the very death, I found out that I was back on it.
So when they told you you're in, was a part of you kind of very excited, or did you think, oh no, I was hoping I might be dropped?
Yeah, there was a real mixture of that. It was like, I was really worried about my feet, and I was worried about, as I say, confidence-wise, it was like, well, these people are really young, and this is going to be, I can go in one direction very slowly for a long period of time. That's what I do. But anything dynamic, fast, anything involving upper body strength, I'm going to be in real trouble. And actually, having a normal day-to-day working life is actually far more comfortable.
So how much did you know going into this final programme? I mean, how much did the selection process tell you about what was going to be actually happening?
We knew very, very little indeed. We'd heard on the selection weekend from we had some SAS people who were training us on the selection weekend, and one of them had let slip the countries of the special forces that were involved. So we had and we weren't sure if it was a rumour but we had a vague idea of the countries that might be involved, and that was accurate. But we had no idea at all about what might be involved in the actual physically or mentally.
Let's take you to the start of the programme, and you meet your final 29. Did you bond with that group much beforehand? Did you have much time to get to know them?
No, I didn't at all, and I recognised some of them from the selection weekend. And there had been a Facebook group that had been started, but I think I'd left and I didn't give them my address, so I didn't even know there was a Facebook group. So some of them knew each other a little bit better, and I'm kind of glad I wasn't on the Facebook group, because I think that would have just really psyched me out completely. So I didn't know them. I was aware. I kind of felt, it's a silly thing to say. I did feel a bit old. I felt a little bit out of it in that respect, and a little bit overawed about being, on a show and not knowing what was going on.
So let's take you through to the first programme then, and it was the US Navy SEALs which took charge of the group in the first one, and the tasks in that episode, as I recall, included lots and lots of sit-ups, pack races, plenty of verbal abuse, and a lot of freezing water challenges as well.
Well, going right back to the very beginning, we arrived at the camp and we met these Navy SEALs on the parade ground. And the first thing they actually did was they made us do lots of sit-ups and press-ups and things like that in our civvies. And I remember at the end of that thinking, God, that was awful. And somebody dropped out straight away, didn't they?
Yeah.
Actually, that evening, before we'd almost had our actual camos, as they were. And then we had that, I don't know if you remember the series, and for those of you who didn't see it, we kind of got our camouflage gear and we had a meal and we went to bed at about 10:30. And these Navy SEALs said to us, right, you need to get to bed now because we're going to get, we want you up at 8. I remember thinking, 8 o'clock, that's quite a lie-in. That can't be right. And sure enough, it wasn't, because we were woken at 1:30 in the morning by explosions. I just remember being hauling myself out of bed, coming out onto the parade ground, and there was smoke everywhere. There was, guns going off, all sorts of things happening, and being drilled. We were made to do press-ups. We were being sprayed with water, awful things. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. And once we got through that, we were then put on a coach down to where you're talking about, which was the coast. And having been woken up at 1:30, we were put on this coach probably 3-4 in the morning, having been drilled extensively. The coach journey was 2.5 hours, I think. And we had a couple of soldiers at the front and said, if any of you fall asleep, you're out.
Wow.
And so just staying awake on that coach was it was awful. And then of course we got to the coastline, so I haven't been up since 1:30. And then we were drilled all day, as you say, giving all these different tasks, a huge amount of tasks. And the worst thing was for everybody, and that's why I think 6 or 7 dropped out that day, was we were in the water, doing press-ups in the water, you name it, mad things, which having watched a couple of programs since, is part of the Navy SEALs training. You see, actually, it's a very famous part of their training. But the wind coming off the sea, it's a beautiful day, but the wind coming off the sea, the wind chill factor, bearing in mind we were cold all the time, was just freezing everybody. Plus the fact we weren't given anything to eat. We were given one energy drink, I remember, and an energy bar at sometime about 2 p.m. And people were really beginning to go then.
But there was an element, presumably, of the cold water thing that you had experienced before. At least you were probably one of the relatively few people in the group that had experienced something similar with a cross-channel swim.
Yes, you're right. And it was, for me, it was the one thing I kept thinking, actually, I can do this. People, we were all shaking with cold. And that's quite for people who are not used to it, it's quite a frightening place to be when your body is just convulsing. But I'd been used to it. Because of the channel training, so I thought, well, I know that this is just part of the process, and it will be okay, and it will pass.
Well, you mentioned as well that at that very early stage, quite a lot of people did drop out quite quickly. So on that basis, was there an element of the pressure was off you a little bit? You kind of at least felt, well, at least I won't be one of the first to go, so I can sort of drop out when I like now.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was I've got through the first thing. That was a heck of an introduction to it, and to come through that, I thought, well, that's good. I've done all right now.
And in fact, by the end of the second episode, there were only apparently 18 of the original 29 left. Were you kind of thinking, though, at that time, sort of, with people dropping off fairly rapidly, were you sort of eyeing being in the top 10 at this point, or did you think, well, if I make it past the final 15, or did you actually think, I could go on and win this?
No, never.
Really?
No, never. Absolutely not. And I was just waiting. It was like, if not now, when? Was kind of, this is not going to last, and there's no way that I'm going to go any further.
And you mentioned the whole sleep deprivation thing, which episode by episode they showed that, I don't think you ever were given more than about 3 or 4 hours sleep. Between the challenges, did they give you then a sort of a decent meal and a decent sort of time to catch up on sleep between, say, the first episode and the second episode, or was it not like that? Was it literally relentless one after the other?
No, it was the edit of the BBC edit is really good, although it doesn't show everything that was going on. There was no let up whatsoever, and when you didn't see us doing whatever task we were performing, there were some characters in black. These were the special forces guys who they'd drafted in, and they were there. They were often drilling us, and sometimes there was even one part in that second episode when they were not just drilling us, but they were making us do even more physical exercise in between the physical exercise tasks that we were already doing. Right. And there was just it was relentless. And the other thing that began to concern people was the lack of food, and it really was, very, very little food at any time. We got a little bit of food in the evenings as it started to settle down a bit, but the first 3 or 4 days was surviving on virtually nothing.
Really fascinating interview with Paul Parrish, and that continues in just a few moments' time. This is Hospital Radio Brockley, and it's Brockley News, and don't forget, still to come this evening, in just over 15 minutes' time, your chance to win some Radio Brockley goodies without leaving your bed. Bedside bingo is here, and David Rouch will be calling out the numbers. And then at 8 o'clock tonight, it's all your choice of tunes on the Sunday Request Show with Keith Reid. Let's find out more about Ultimate Hell Week with Paul Parrish from the Aspire Centre. Well, let's take you back to the third episode, which featured Navsog from the Philippines.
Ah, the third episode, my favourite.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you featured quite heavily from the third episode onwards. You had to lead a team as well for the first time in episode 3, which didn't quite go to plan, did it?
No, it didn't. Allegedly, I had to lead a team, so... Yeah, so that really exposed me. So I think I'm famous for one of my quotes, which was, well, I was trying to keep my head down, but that's gone really badly wrong. I was told to lead a team. I think it's fair to say that my management style is fairly touchy-feely at best, and it doesn't translate to a military environment. No. And it really doesn't work, and it was very frustrating for everyone. So suddenly the third episode, I do get pushed to the fore completely for all the wrong reasons. And I remember being there at the time thinking, oh no, this is awful. I'm really not cut out for this at all. And worse than that, my kids are going to see this, and I'm on my way out. I'm going to go because of this, and I'm going to go today because it was such a disaster.
Well, there is sort of an element that I was thinking watching it is that, you're too nice for the process, really. I mean, for some of these leaders, you have to be absolutely ruthless and, you can't care about anyone else's feelings. But you're not really perhaps one of those people.
But I think I suppose there's part of me on that programme that I went on and I wasn't prepared to compromise. In a team of people, it is a team. And for some people, I think it is their role to look after others and to think about how others maybe I take that too far, and certainly in a military environment, and there's probably a happy compromise. And I think the show after that, when again I had to lead, I think the compromise came through much better. As in, I was much more caring about people, and the BBC in their edit were very kind, I thought, showing that element of me.
Well, I was going to say, it was presumably better that way. Than there was another chap, I think it was Spicer again, actually, who'd really been pushing himself as the leader, very much so, to the extent that he was pretty much getting on everyone's nerves at that point. Was it literally a case of everyone against him?
There was an element of it. I mean, I think if those guns that we had ammunition, I think Spicer might not be with us anymore. He did have a habit of, especially the younger ones, they started getting really wound up. And I felt quite protective towards him at times, because I didn't like that, because I think he had a strategy which he thought was the military way, and it was to lead at all cost, and of course there was mutiny behind that. So again, it is compromise. Spicer's way is not the right way. My way is definitely not the right way, and there is a middle ground that some people were really good at.
At the end of the third episode, I remember it very well, you had to do this endurance run with a huge weight on your back, and you made it back, and then you had to do 200 burpees, these things you were talking about before. Well, explain what a burpee is for anyone who doesn't know, because you weren't familiar with them beforehand.
No, I wasn't. Still not that familiar, even though I've done several thousand of them now.
Yeah.
You sort of throw yourself on the ground and kick your legs back up into the air with a jump, and hey, there's your one burpee. So almost like a semi-press up. Great. And
the funny thing was, and I remember at the end of that programme, you seemed to remain so positive. I mean, you were quite a long way behind the others, but the instructor, Dante, I think his name was sort of quite complimentary to you at the end of that.
In terms of the edit, I wasn't the last one back, actually.
Were you not?
There were a couple of people after me. But in terms of what happened at that point, Dante and myself, which you won't see in the edit, there'd been a couple of things where we'd had eyeball-to-eyeball sessions. I mean, I told him that he was kind of what I thought, and he kind of got a bit of respect from him from that, even though I was having such a terrible time. Because I thought I was going out. I felt it was important that, I should at least tell him what I thought of the group and how he was very lucky to have them and this sort of thing. So, yeah, I think he'd begun to like me for that. And then when we came to the burpees themselves, he was funny because I couldn't do them. So he just kept making me do more and more. So when you saw 200 burpees, it took me about 30 to get going. Then I did my first 100, got my stone, and I was halfway through my second 100, and he just looked at me and he said, "Parrish, you're cheating, do another 50. Which was just so ludicrous. I couldn't stop laughing, and of course it made him laugh. And at the end, and of course it took me ages to do them. But at the end, he was just standing next to me, and he obviously really liked me, and he was just saying, "You're very funny. You like this, don't you?" And I said, "Well, I don't like it, but and it was so ludicrous. It was hard not to laugh. I mean, I think in the end, he really quite liked me, and he quite liked my attitude."
Well, I know they always say that a big part of the whole SAS selection process is sort of being able to remain positive in the face of all these things being thrown your way, and that definitely seemed to come across. You might finish near to the back, but you were still going to do it with a smile on your face.
Yeah, and I think it's something that. So a very wise person once told me that you're only as happy as you choose to be. And it was awful, obviously, a lot of the things, but it was also quite ludicrous. And there was a funny side to it. There was a funny side to a 50-year-old man doing this, and there was a funny side to everybody doing this. And it's a privilege to do things like that. So there was that humour that came through, and I couldn't stop laughing about it. And also, it became more. The fact was, I should have obviously gone in that third episode, but somehow I clung on, and then I carried on clinging on, and that also tickled me.
So let's take you on to episode 4, and I know this is your personal favourite episode of the lot, which featured the Australian SAS. I mean, it was an absolutely brutal episode. You had a few black marks against your name from Jason, the leader, that time. And it was sort of becoming apparent, I guess, because I think at that point you were the oldest member of the group left, that you were, not able to keep up the pace necessarily of some of the younger contestants, but you didn't ever quit.
No, I never thought about quitting. I knew that I'd get fired at some point, but I never ever thought I'd quit. So the Jason episode starts with, a pack run, and I think I'd turn up 25 minutes late or whatever I normally did. And it became quite funny because I was always getting a black mark for those. But then when it came to just tasks of working together and just toughing it out, nothing moved very fast. Nobody could. So I was quite happy, and I just would keep going, and it never occurred to me. That episode was where I thought, actually, I was definitely on my way out, because I was put in charge again. And again, it was a task that I had no idea how to handle. But it kind of worked out. I don't know if it should have worked out, but it did, and I just, I suppose, threw myself into it. But it just went on and on and on. It never stopped. It was 30 hours without sleep, without anything to eat. But it's the kind of stuff I do. It's what got me through the Arch to Arc, is that just, I have a philosophy that I know that everything will pass. It does. Everything's transient. You will get a cup of tea eventually in life.
And it was interesting that, you almost said to me yourself that you were portrayed at this point as the underdog of the team. There was a lot of people sort of willing you on. When the programme was actually being shown, did you get a lot of reaction on Twitter?
Yes, I did. I think everyone likes an underdog, don't they? And I did. I started getting a lot of support from all sorts of people saying, "Oh, it's great to see you doing so well." And I think, I think I obviously attracted the people who supported the underdogs.
But why do you think that they kept you in the process so long?
I guess because there was that humour that came through, what, just another 100 burpees and that sort of thing, that they've begun to start noticing me, and I didn't give up. And there was a lot that you didn't, Freddie Flintoff kept saying, "You're just not giving up, are you?" No, I think I'll carry on for a bit longer. And I think that maybe gave me some traction with the film crew. Episode
5 featured the Russian Special Forces, and the chap leading that was a guy called Sonny. And you described him to me earlier on as the scariest of the lot. What do you think was the reason for that?
He was the scariest of the lot because he was the most rational and he was the most philosophical. But he had this he'd say something like, "You're dying," and then he would grin at us, and he had this skull-like face, and his teeth would show, and you thought, maybe you're not that rational. There's something deep in there that could be really scary. Also, I think his background, I would imagine some of the things he'd seen. I think he'd been out in the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. He'd come through that Soviet era, and I would imagine he'd seen and perhaps done some things that you just think, wow, I don't really want to go there. I don't want to find out about.
And the key thing about him seemed to be that he wanted to get everyone to admit their fears.
I think he was very kind to me. Obviously, you only see me in the second of the days. The first day was probably my best day in the whole of the series, actually. The very first time we meet him is in an abseil, and we're at the top of the abseil, and we go up to him individually. That's the first time we've talked to him, and he looked at me and he said, "You're the old man." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have any fears?" And I said, "Well, while we're here, if you've got about 30 minutes, where do you want me to start?" And that made him laugh, and then he abseiled me off the top. I fell over as well. I ended up upside down on the abseil, which was quite funny. Yeah, I have lots of fears, and I think that's maybe one of the things about the show was I think the way they edited it as well, they kept putting that, like, my lack of self-confidence, that sort of thing, and some people don't like that. But I also think it's quite real if people just, we all have fears. I know for a fact we all have fears. And actually his view was, if you don't talk about your fears, you will never approach, you will never deal with them. And we all do have fears. And I think he kind of I think generally I have lots and lots of fears, and I'm open about them.
Well, in that final vote off, he actually commented that if he could remove 10 years from you, he saw you as a contender, he'd like to work with you. That was quite a big statement for him to make, wasn't it? He clearly liked you. He clearly rated you.
Yeah, he did. I think he did, and I think he probably, because of my age, and again, I think the attitude thing. And by then we were that final 10 was such a close knit group, and and there was a nice bit when I do obviously finish on that assault course way behind everyone else, and everyone's giving me a big clap, and I think he quite liked that as well. And I was out, and I expected to go out, and I never expected to be in that long, and I thought it was a really, really nice way of summing it up, really. I really like that.
When you were finally voted off, what were your emotions at that point? Were you relieved, or was a little part of you disappointed that you didn't make it to the final 6?
No, I was never disappointed. I was amazed to have got that far. I knew after episode 4, when nobody had been voted off at the end of episode 4, everyone just dropped out. I thought, well, this really has become quite a journey. This is a real odyssey now, and anything beyond this is just ridiculous anyway. And I was fine to go. I'd done things that I could never imagine, and I was fine. I had no problems with it at all.
One thing that you said to me just before we started the interview, actually, is that obviously because you had no contact with the outside world, you weren't able to tell your family or your work how long you're going to be away for. And actually, initially, you were expecting to be away for, just a couple of days or something. And it turns out you're away for a couple of weeks. So none of them had any idea how well you'd done in the process.
No, they didn't. And I had obviously not expected to go very far at all. I told work I'll be in, after the weekend, latest, and actually I then had another week off. My family began to get quite concerned because we knew my limitations. There was I wouldn't really expect it to be in for that long, and suddenly I think I thought I'd done a runner because I just hadn't been in contact. I couldn't be in contact, so it was a big surprise to everybody. There's one more thing that happened as well. Can I just put this in as well? So it all finished, and I didn't make the final, and the final was a guy from the SAS called Bob Podesta, who was I think one of the main, I think has seen many things in the SAS, and he presided over the final. And about 4 or 5 days ago, somebody sent me a Twitter link via Twitter, and said you should listen to this. I put it on, and it was British Forces Radio, and it was Bob Podesta being interviewed about Ultimate Hell Week, and he went through this thing and talking about it and the kind of state of everybody and how they'd done and all this sort of thing. And they said to him, "Is there anybody that stood out to you?" And he said, well, funnily enough, yeah, there's this old guy, guy called Parrish. And he said, just kept going, just kept doing it, and his attitude and everything was what we'd wanted in the SAS. And I tell you, if he'd been 10 years younger, we'd have had him in the SAS, which makes me howl laughter because I can't imagine anyone less suited for the SAS. But there was obviously something there that I hadn't realised myself, and it's probably one of the nicest things that anybody's ever said. And I was really, to have it sent and hearing that was like, gosh, really, that's quite special.
Claire Miller emerged as the champion at the end of the process. A worthy winner, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. She was, right from the beginning, quite spectacular. And I remember thinking, how can you be so strong? I don't understand how anyone could be so strong in such a small, compact body. How can you do that? And she was great. She was very personable. Very great sense of humour as well. And I think for me, that if you're human with these superhuman attributes, I think that's great. And she was very, very human. And maybe that's what they were also, I think there's an element of that's what they were looking for. Danny Bent, the guy who came second, is a spectacularly interesting person in all the right ways. Probably one of the nicest people I've ever met.
And do you think you'll keep in touch with any of the people who took part in the process?
Provided not said anything too horrible on this interview. Yeah, we're all really, it was a very intense period of our lives, and we're all very much in contact, and there's all sorts of reunions. We see each other, we're in touch all the time. There's a couple of them are doing some work for Aspire now, which is really nice, and it will probably give me lifelong friends, I think, because it was a very intense period of our life.
So you're back to your day job now at the Aspire National Training Centre. Tell us very briefly about your role there.
I'm the Director of Fundraising Marketing for Aspire, so it's my job to help get the funds in for the charity. We get no government funding, and we're there basically to help people who have sustained spinal cord injury go from injury to independence, and we supply services that will help them live as fulfilled a life as possible once they've left the spinal units.
And do you have any sort of big events coming up at the Aspire in the coming months? Any more fundraisers?
Yeah, it's pretty much non-stop at the moment. We're in the middle of our Aspire Channel swim, when people swim the distance of the channel, 22 miles in a 3-month period. It's a lot of swimming, but last year it raised about £425,000 to help people with spinal cord injury. I've just come back from taking people across the Solent. I don't know how I come across in these sort of interviews, but I know how important sport and physical exercise has been for me to I guess, to understand myself, and I get so much pleasure watching other people achieving things that they didn't think that they could do. And I was on the Solent watching 12 people swim from Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight at the weekend. And I find it really emotional watching them, because the joy when you do something, and watching them go from the sheer abject terror before they get in to the joy when they finish. And I get a real buzz from that. So I love the events that we do here at Aspire. I think they're incredibly inspirational.
Brilliant. And if you haven't been across to the Aspire National Training Centre, it's based here in the grounds of the RNOH. It's a fantastic facility, and I do recommend that you pop across there, and there'll be lots of people over there that look after you. Are there any details you can give out in terms of website and contact details if anyone wants to find out more?
By all means, yeah, the Aspire website is www.aspire.org.uk. Have a look at the Aspire, if you fancy doing a real challenge like the Aspire Channel Swim, the pool-based one, it's www.aspirechannelswim.co.uk. It's fantastic. Have a check out of that. It's something that you can achieve, and there's lots there. Have a look at the website and get involved.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you again. Thank you so much for coming in, and well done for finishing in the final 10, which is an incredible achievement, may I say. And you did fantastically well. I know you're always very modest in these interviews, but you did incredibly well in that series. So well done to you.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you.
And a reminder, you can go back and watch that whole series on YouTube in case you missed it. Search for Special Forces Ultimate Hell Week. It really is worth a view. And don't forget, you can catch up with previous editions of Brockley News by following the links from our website. Go to radiobrockley.org and then follow the links to our YouTube site from there. Up next on Radio Brockley, it's Bedtime Bingo, your chance to win some super Radio Brockley goodies with David Rauch. Good luck if you're playing along. The patient rep should be with you by now, hopefully. And then at 8 o'clock tonight, it's all your choice of tunes on the Sunday Request Show with Keith Reeve. Brockley News returns at the same time next week. From me, Alan Joyce, though. Good night.